doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a long time since I've been in Memphis. Peter still owned the company back in those days, and must be about must be a good 12 to 15 years, long time. So Memphis is definitely, thanks to you guys in the fine wine business.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
a
pretty impressed.
it's a growing city, and definitely the wine business is certainly growing as well. It's
Yeah. What's your background in the wine business, if I can ask?
So I've been working at Joe's pretty much for about 3 years now, and just kind of started there. And I came from a background and I worked in the film industry for a while after I finished college.
Okay.
And then decided I didn't really want to do that anymore. And and I'm originally from here, so I moved back home and kind of just started working at Joe's and learning about wine. And now I'm running the wine club here.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll go ahead and introduce you, Ken Onish of Southern Starz. So what is your background? What kind of background do you come from?
Well, my background is deep in wine. My dad had a liquor store in Long Island, New York, when I was growing up as a kid. So we were pretty accustomed to drinking wine at the dinner table before I was 18 years old. I liked it, and when I got out of the Army and finished university, no idea what I wanted to do, but I kind of liked wine. And I was fortunate enough to get introduced to Alexis Lachine. And I went to work for Alexis Lachine at Chateau Lascombe at the tender age of 23. Not knowing much French, which I learned pretty quickly, and worked for Alexis for a year, traveling with him around France and Germany to all the estates he represented. And came back to the States, and my next great move was hooking up with Frank Schoonmaker. And I became in charge of national sales for Frank Schoonmaker's selections, and eventually his junior partner. He passed away, and I brought the business over to Seagram and joined forces with Ab Simon to form Chateau Estate Wines Company, which at the time was the largest importer of fine wines from France and Germany in the United States. And then I've done lots of other things. I've been in the beer business in Ukraine. I've been in the vodka business in Ukraine. I've been in the Romanian wine business. But I started in the Southern Hemisphere in 1994, when sanctions had just been lifted in South Africa. So I've been traveling to South Africa for 25 years, seeing the good, seeing the bad, seeing the ugly, and know what's real, know the people that are real. And my goodness, you've got one of the most sensational guys, David Finlayson, to offer. Fabulous family, good friends now, and we've been just enjoying what he's been producing recently.
Yeah, let's talk about him a little bit. He's been kind of all over the place in his wine career as well,
Well, he has. David is third generation. He's a Scot. His grandfather was from, I'm a golfer, so it's a good thing. He was from Inverness, Scotland. He came down to the Cape as a pathologist. He started a phenomenal winery called Hartenberg and Blauklippen, and eventually his son Walter ran Blauklippen. And then Walter, back in the late 1990s, went off on his own to open up what became the most remarkable estate called Glencarlew. David had just graduated first in his class at Elsenburg College, joined his dad at Glencarlew, took over winemaking in the late 1990s. And during that period of time, he did some stages. He worked for probably 6 months at a time, a 6-month stage with Peter Lehman in Barossa Valley, a 6-month stage in New Zealand at Te Mata. And the one he loved most was his 6 months at Chateau Margaux, where he learned how to make Cabernet Sauvignon. And that's his passion. Yeah. That's his real passion, is Cabernet. So David is, they sold Glencorlew to Donald Hess back in 2003. And Hess wouldn't complete the sale unless David stayed on as winemaker and general manager for the next 5 years. So it took him a little time to get finished with his obligation at Glencorlew. So I think the first David Finlayson wine started maybe 2011, 2012 with his own estate, beautiful property on the Siemensberg mountain slope on the Stellenbosch side. It's got about 65 acres there. And it's a small little winery. He makes about 10,000 cases a year.
Yeah, I read somewhere that like his aha wine was an 82 Chateau Margaux, and to then end up working there is just so cool. Do you think he takes a lot of that French influence when he's making his wines in South Africa?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, back at that time, people in Bordeaux were switching over to fermentation in stainless steel. They were getting out of fermentation in barrels. And David took that on right away. And David was one of the first guys to get into using concrete eggs for fermentation as well, which he believes in because it's a hands-off process. It's like infusing tea rather than punching down hard in tanks. It keeps you away from that. And yeah, he very much wants to make Margaux, I mean, frankly, and when it comes to Cabernet, and he'd like to make Puligny Montrachet with his Chardonnay. And then he's got some great Rhone blends that he does his own thing. But Chenin Blanc is no surprise because the farms that they bought, Chenin Blanc was prolific in South Africa, not for making table wine, but for making brandy. Sure. And when the Dutch, got to the Cape, it was all about making brandy wine. And they took their technology of pot stills and column still distillation. Chenin Blanc was a preferred variety, so they planted it. And, there's more Chenin Blanc planted in South Africa than there is in the Loire Valley, as an example. So he found this little site. He's got 2 fantastic sites. One that was planted by the University of Stellenbosch in 1947 on the Capsic farm, which is not too far away from him. And he bought it from the university. He reconstituted the vineyards. It's all old bush vines. And the yields are scary. 3/4 of a ton an acre.
Wow.
Almost not worthwhile to harvest.
Right.
Then he picked up another vineyard on a nearby farm that was planted in 1966, also planted by the University of Stellenbosch, where his yields are 1.25 tons per acre. So he's getting off a total of 3 tons of grapes. 3 tons of grapes from 2 properties, all old bush vines, and in a good year, 180 to 200 cases for the world. That's it. But he's dedicated to keeping these vines going. And the name is kind of amusing because it's called Camino Africana, which is a little bit of the Spanish Camino Real, the King's Road or the King's Way. And it's not that he took the intersection that you come to in life and went this way and everybody went that way, but he's found some fantastic old abandoned vineyards that were planted, some phenomenal Cabernet Franc vineyards as well, Pinot Noir even, and he's putting together this little patchwork of really old vine material. I mean, we're talking about minimum 40 to 50 years old, these vineyards. He's planted a lot of new stuff with new clones. Of course he has, because he bought a new farm about 18, 20 years ago. So all virus-free material. The other stuff is pretty virus, so that's why the yields are very limited.
Sure. So why do you think he chose to kind of end up in South Africa? Do you think because I know
Well, he was born there. I mean, his grandfather came down from Scotland. His father was born in South Africa.
Mm.
He is South African, and he loves it. He's loves playing rugby like all the other South Africans around him. Loves playing golf. It's just one of the most beautiful, scenic little towns to live in, Stellenbosch. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's 45-minute drive from Cape Town, which is one of the coolest food and music cities in the world. So it's a pretty nice place. I mean, obviously there are problems. They've got problems, problems all over the world. But yeah, he loves it there.
That's great. Do you So y'all with Southern Starz work a lot with South African stuff, New Zealand, Australia. What kind of made you focus on these regions that
So I had been in the fine wine business at the I guess as high as you could go. I mean, the only thing I've never represented was Romanée-Conti, but I mean, everything in Bordeaux, everything else in Burgundy, everything in the, in the Rhine, the Moselle. And I was getting a little bit bored after doing that for 25 years. It seemed to me like all of the young people were heading to the Southern Hemisphere. I like young people. I like to see what their innovations are. And I started with South Africa, then headed to New Zealand and Australia, and about 10 years after that, Argentina and Chile. So I think that, breaking all the rules that were in the Northern Hemisphere have been broken in the Southern Hemisphere. Because we did this, we have to continue doing it. Well, why, if you can do something better, right? Whether it's grapes or fermentation or whatever it might be. So I've enjoyed the enthusiasm and breaking down all the rules and coming up with a set of new rules that make sense to them. They're different from the Northern Hemisphere. And, they make great balanced wines. The wines are, a degree higher in alcohol, but they're closer to the equator. And that's the way it goes. So I've enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the experience, and now I can reflect back on 25 years in the Northern Hemisphere and 25 years in the Southern Hemisphere. It's all good. Everything has just pluses all over the place. No minuses at all. Sure.
So I've got the Chenin Blanc and the Pepper Pot in front of me, and you touched on it a little bit, but the Chenin, I mean, it almost has a little bit of Loire style going on with it, I find.
So a little bit, if you remember, the region of Coteaux de Leon in the Loire Valley, there's an excellent property I recall called Coulée de Saran, which I guess would classify, if there was a classification, as a Grand Cru from the Loire Valley. And then there was another producer in Vouvray called Huet, Huet, who makes phenomenal wine. So it was somewhere between a great Coulée de Saran and a great Vouvray is where this wine fits in. And it will age, like both of those wines do, for quite a period of time. I think it's at its peak now. I think the people in your club are going to enjoy it now, but that's a personal thing on aging. When do you want to drink the wine? Do you want to have a little oxidation because it brings out more flavors, or do you like it the way it is now? So I would say that he had nothing in mind. It's the way it came out. So if that makes sense to you, those two associations in the Loire Valley,
Absolutely. No, I'm so glad we're doing it for November too, because I think this is the perfect Thanksgiving wine too.
Oh my goodness, Thanksgiving would be killer.
Yeah.
No, seriously, killer.
Oh yeah.
Tell all of your friends, all of your customers,
Mhm.
to not over chill the wine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Please, because you'll just, all the attributes will be totally missed. So refrigerate, take it out a good hour. If it's been overnight, a good hour. Let it warm up a little bit, and it should be perfect then.
Absolutely. And then we've got the pepper pot. So when did he start wanting to do some Rhone varietals?
David's always liked the Rhone. I think he was probably working with Peter Lehman in Barossa Valley.
Mm-hmm.
They got to know Syrah, and they got to know a little bit about Grenache at the time, and a little bit, they have a little bit of Mourvedre over there as well. And he didn't want to necessarily make a Rhone wine. So the background is the pepper pot itself. What is a pepper pot? It's on the label.
Mm-hmm.
It's a three-legged cast iron cooking pot. Because in South Africa, no one outside the cities has electricity.
Okay.
So how do you cook a hot dinner? Well, everybody has a cast iron stew pot, which became known as their pepper pot. You can't clean it out, because you can't clean those things out. And Mrs. Jones's pepper pot, what comes out of there, is different from Mrs. Smith's pepper pot, because they're just none are alike, because you can't clean the bloody stuff. So part of the Cape expression in food is Malaysian. There are a lot of Cape Malays that came in from Malaysia hundreds of years ago. And it's beautiful, flowery spices, beautiful flower in all of the Cape cuisine. So David tried to imagine, how can I make that in a wine? What are some of the ingredients that would mimic the Malaysian spices? And he came up with the secret ingredient was tannat.
Okay.
Tannat was just the mortar that put, the Syrah and the Mourvedre together. It's just about 8% tannat. It's just a small amount. But as this goes down the road, he wasn't trying to really replicate Côte du Rhône, although it tastes like a better Côte du Rhône, a Côte du Rhône Village. Sure. I was just writing a letter today with Steve Tanz's quote, because we have something for you to look at next year. We've got the 2018 with a new package, et cetera, et cetera. And Tanzer had a great quote. He said, "Why would you drink Côte du Rhône when you could buy pepper pot?" That's Steve Tanzer.
Yeah.
And sitting at his house at a table tasting wine.
Mm-hmm.
So what it may be for the consumer is an expression of Côte du Rhône in a South African quote unquote style. So it wasn't to try to mimic anything from the Rhone Valley, but it was trying to bring out the Malaysian spice flavors in a wine that would accompany the cuisine from the Cape.
That's a really interesting way to take on it. No, I think that's really cool. Do you think he has like that kind of mindset with a lot of his wines?
No, with this one in particular, he was kind of fascinated. I guess David is a bit of a chef, but he was kind of fascinated with the flavors in wine and the flavors in food as you have them both out on the counter, going back and forth, and what wine would marry with this food. And he said, well, maybe I should find a wine, how to blend a wine that would really be the perfect marriage for the food. So that's how it came about.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what does David have on the horizon?
Well, on the horizon is always to make one of the great Cabernet Sauvignons in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Always on the horizon. He's got a wine called GS. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I have not, no.
The GS Cabernet do you have a second for me to explain it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So in 1946-47, there was a man named George Spiess, so GS, who was said to have produced the most remarkable vintage of Cabernet Sauvignon ever produced in the Cape. Years went by, George passed away. 40 years later, David is working with a woman to design some new labels, like the Pepper Pot label and the Camino Africano label. And her name is Ronelle Spiess. Not a common name in South Africa. And he said, was your father George Spiess? And she said, no, my grandfather was George Spiess. Do you remember, David's trying to make the best Cabernet Sauvignon that he can.
Sure.
Do you know where your grandfather's vineyard was? Well, I have no clue. So for the next 2 or 3 months, they drove around and got maps out. I mean, there was, no, GPS to work with. And they discovered some old vines in this location where grandfather's original vineyard was said to be. They spent 5 years restoring the vineyard back to whether it's original or different condition, but back to superb condition. And David made a Cabernet Sauvignon. He started making it about 3 years ago, called GS Cabernet Sauvignon after George Spiess. And today it's got to be the best Cabernet Sauvignon in South Africa. It would be right up there with all the jewels that you sell from Napa Valley in your store. It's an amazing wine. We have a wonderful account called Mastro's Restaurants, which is probably the most expensive steakhouse in the country. I think there are about 14 or 15 restaurants where it's prominently featured on the list. And then we did something cool. I know you know of Burns Steakhouse in Tampa, which has got the most amazing wine list. They're pouring it by the glass for $30 a glass.
Wow.
Yeah. So what he has in mind is to continue to develop the GS Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm sure by the end of this conversation, somebody from your distributor will be in with a bottle
Sure.
for you to try. But it's knockout stuff. So all the other stuff he's going to continue to do, but his mind is made up, not just making the best Cabernet in South Africa, just making a fantastic international quality Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think you may have seen that in his regular Cabernet recently.
Absolutely.
Pretty serious wine for what he's putting out. And the next vintage, the 2018, which is going to be released soon, just got 94 points from Decanter Magazine. So he's on his way. When you think about Cabernet producers around the world, he's going to be in that category.
Yeah, and that's so exciting. He's so young. It's just so exciting that he's got all this time to just, develop and continue to develop that. That's great.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I appreciate you coming on here. Do you have anything to say before we hop off here?
No, not really. I mean, those wines should be really interesting because of the story, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Of the story behind both the Chenin Blanc and the story behind the Pepper Pot. And I think stories are important to people at the dinner table. So, talking about how the food was prepared, et cetera, whether it was organic or from this farmer or that farmer. It's also kind of fun to talk about the background stories about wine, not just look at a label and say, yeah, it's okay, or it's different, or, it's a lot of feel-good stories is what we try to talk about, the people that we enjoy working with. So I've got nothing else to say. It's really nice meeting you, Walker.
Yes,
And I thank you very much for the work that you're doing for everybody to show good wines to your constituents in Memphis, Tennessee. So much appreciated.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you for making it possible that we can even bring these wines to them. So.
Okay, well, then more on the way.
All right. Thank you,
All right, Walker, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.